You're listening to the Dungeons, Dragons, and Psychology Podcast. Tabletop role-playing games are all about telling stories, but there are also stories out there about what brought those people who enjoy role-playing games to the game in the first place, and about what they've learned as being part of the community. Our guests today are responsible for sharing those stories with our community as part of their new book. I'm Robert Walker, author of Session Zero, the DMG to writing great campaigns in any system, and this is my show where I teach collaborative storytellers how to create memorable campaigns using psychology. Let's get right to the interview.
Please welcome to the show the co-hosts of Dragon Talk, the official D&D podcast, Greg Tito and Shelly Mazzanoble. This is crazy.
Hi,
welcome to my show.
We're excited. This is great.
I can hardly believe you're both here.
Wow.
I have to admit, I'm a little bit starstruck right now. I've been listening to Dragon Talk for years and dreaming about having the opportunity to talk to both of you. So this is kind of like a, fanboy moment
well,
for me.
all you had to do was ask.
And say psychophys.
We love this.
And
We love
get
talking to
summoned into your presence that way.
So let's tell my cyclithids about your upcoming book. Welcome to Dragon Talk, inspiring conversations about Dungeons and Dragons and
You
the
nailed
people
it.
who
You nailed the intro there. That was all you needed.
Is,
Oh, that's
you
fantastic.
definitely did.
I mean, I feel like that
It,
that's the only way to say it,
100%.
right?
It
It's
is.
got to be
and
something
I can only
like
hear
that.
Greg's voice when you say Greg, you want to do the elevator pitch? You're so good at it.
Yeah, we keep trading back and forth. But this is a book about D&D community and the podcast that Shelly and I have run for the last 7 or so years, from the offices at Wizards of the Coast to now our home offices, and highlighting all of those folks within the community. And it has become, in talking about it, as well as getting people's reaction, thinking about it almost more like a guidebook for folks who may be D&D curious, who want to know why this game has become so ubiquitous in culture and people just want to jump in and start playing, as well as being a kind of a map for the different folks within the D&D community that have taken the inspiration from this game and done amazing things with it. Some of them are storytellers, some of them are creators and actors and Hollywood directors, some of them are streamers and educators, and a large portion of them are doctors and mental health professionals who have used Dungeons and Dragons to great effect in their practices, in their personal lives, and all of the above. And so the whole book is I think a good primer on why D&D has the impact that it has had over the last 40 to 50 years.
So I'm a bit
really
curious.
good.
Where did the idea start? Like, what made you get on this train of let's write a book
podcast.
about the show, about all these people?
So we can't take full credit for it, but I got an email from an editor at the University of Iowa Press. She had read my previous 2 books, and she was a Dragon Talk listener. And she said, I would love to see a book about a podcast about a game. But she wanted to see a book, about Dragon Talk and about the origins of it and how it came to be, like kind of what the creative process is behind making this podcast. And ignored her email for several weeks, as one does, because I honestly thought it was a phishing scam at first. I'm like, no. But then I went back to it, and it turns out that she really was a real person. And I was very excited about this idea. So naturally went to Greg and said, let's write a book about Dragon Talk. And we came up together with like really what we thought the book would be about. Now it's kind of more of a funny story about how Dragon Talk actually started, and it's like little rocky origin story. But what we thought the crux of the book should be is the people who play Dungeons and Dragons and all of the different guests that we've had the pleasure to talk to, and as a way to show that D&D is a game for everyone, no matter who you are, where you come from, what your interests are. There is something that you can find valuable and entertaining about this game. And also the thing that Greg and I just love, I think the most out of having these interviews with people, and even really our jobs in general, is seeing the ways that D&D has impacted people's lives. And I mean, especially that D&D has had these profound positive effects on people's mental health, just as a way to provide that social connection. There's all of that emotional connection. There's, of course, educational. Like there is so much to love about this game, and that doesn't even go into like the interpersonal parts. And people have told us some really incredible stories, and that's what we wanted to share with people. Is just this is the subtitle really says it all. This game is it's a great, entertaining, fun game, but wow, it's also really inspiring, and it's really impacted the lives of so many people.
You've had so many conversations on your show over the years. How difficult was it to narrow down and really choose the ones that we're going to
we've had
the book?
more than
we should have actually probably pitched 3 books.
Much longer. Yeah, right. This is a trilogy. It starts here and
sequels in the works.
They go to Mordor at the end, I swear. But yeah, no, it was interesting that we had this idea, and then honestly, we had stories that impacted us, and it was actually a inspiration from Shelly's previous books, as well as putting together the proposal where we were like, well, this has something that we learn. The essays and things that we would write about our guests are only good if they affected us in some kind of way, and we could bring something to it. So it wasn't just like a one-to-one of like, oh, this was what happened in the interview, and have that be what we talked about in the book. The ones that we chose were, again, ones that like affected us and had like, something we could add to it from our personal stories. And so those ended up being pretty much rising to the top pretty easily. We had a few lists. I had ones that I wanted to talk about, and Shelly had ones that she wanted to write about. And there weren't that many overlaps. That was what was really interesting. There were ones that I certainly seem to have a type of thing that of guest and their story that I really enjoy, and Shelly has one as well. And we didn't. It was actually not that hard to narrow it down to the folks that we wanted to write about for this first volume.
And how did you find the process of collaborating together and writing together? I know, Shelly, you've written a few books in the past. I've got a copy, or I bought my wife a copy of your Confessions of a Part-Time Sorceress. But what was it like working with another author for the first time? Really?
It was great because it was Greg. I don't know. I don't have anything to compare it to. However, it was interesting for sure, because I did not want to disappoint Greg, and I did not want to let Greg down. And so there were always like that deadline is looming, like whenever we had, our own personal deadlines, like, oh, we have to, write this by this time or turn this into the editor by this time. I'm not missing. I'm not. And I wouldn't miss a deadline anyway. I take this pretty seriously, but it's really, when you have somebody who's also counting on you as a partner, then you want to do just that much more, because his name's on the book too. So I don't, I want to make sure that I'm doing right by that. But I will say it was very enjoyable to have this like virtual writing partner out there, because, we work during the day. This was not part of our job. So we could not be, just writing a book while we're doing our day job. We both have kids. So I couldn't really start writing until, 10 o'clock at night after the kid went to bed, and I finished doing whatever other stuff I had to do in the evening. As you may know, writing can be a very lonely endeavor. It's very solitary. It's just you and all the characters in your brain. But Greg and I had a shared doc, and I could see him in it, and I could see like the word count ticking up, or I could, just see like, oh, Greg's editing this section. And then we had a Teams chat that we would just talk to each other, like, oh, hey, how's it going? What are you working on? How's your night? And then occasionally it would be like 1 a.m. and we'd be like, good night. See you in like 7 hours for our next meeting. But that was it was fun to have like that writing partner.
Totally. And
shared goal.
And you both have gotten a printed copy now.
Got a box of them.
You had it in your hands.
Yeah.
Oh,
nice.
Amazing
to see both of our names on this together. And I'll second everything Shelly said. But I had not written a full book before, and Shelly had 2 previous ones already published. So I was a little bit like, oh, I don't want to let the published D&D elf help author down. I got to keep going. I have to keep taking cues from her. And she had also done the whole process of speaking to editors and agents and all that stuff as well before too. And so I felt like the newbie going in and being like, oh, what can you tell me about this? Is this the right thing to say? How do we work on this? And having each other's back on that, as well as a veteran like Shelly to be able to depend on for advice and things like that, was super helpful, as well as all of the plus ones that we were able to do. Like I really appreciated just having the smallest comments in the world of just being like, hey, I thought this was funny. Good job. And those would just buoy me up for, a week or so of writing.
I could keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And so that was really great. You don't necessarily have that by yourself, unless you're sharing your work, with family members or something like that on a regular basis. And so having that constant lifting each other up was really vital. And I wouldn't have traded it for the world.
No, me neither.
I think that is interesting, because the book that I wrote before I started my podcast, I was definitely all on my own on that. And it was, again, late at night because I had a full-time job. And so everything was done in a similar fashion. I'd finish late in the middle of the night and then send off what I'd written to my wife in the morning, because she did my editing for me. But it does there's a lot of help with somebody who's close to you, somebody who's kind of encouraging you, cheering you along the entire way. I think that does make the whole process more fun and a little easier to just
totally
swallow,
yeah.
So to speak.
And not wanting to let each other down, right? That was also really vital to it, because life can get in the way of all the things, and we're like, oh God, we got an impending deadline, but just knowing that the both of us were in the trenches together and trying to get this done on the right time, it never felt quite so, I don't know, impossible. It felt like an attainable task at all times, which it doesn't feel like that when I've tried to write books on my own in many ways, try to do other projects, and they don't always finish, right? You're not, because you don't have that coach who's being like, yeah, good job, keep going. No matter what I do, I'm just going to have to employ Shelly to make sure that you're like, yeah, good job, keep going.
Do that. I will send you messages and say, that was funny. That's good.
It's going to be your personal motivation coach for the
you
whole
start doing
thing.
those videos like, what's his name? The actor who's like, just do it.
Oh, yeah. But yeah, just do it. It's super
You got a career in that in the future, Shelly, I'm sure.
Nice.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
So I know, Shelly, you mentioned it earlier on as you were chatting, but the way that D&D has been able to help people overcome so many things, depression or anxiety. I know you talked on the show a few weeks ago about imposter syndrome, or just like the ability to make new friends, meet new people, and branch out and be social in a way that maybe they haven't ever been before. Is there anything about the stories that you pulled from in this book that really stand out to you or were powerful to you in that sort of sense, the sort of self-help or the way that D&D changed people's lives?
I mean, that's my type. That's those interviews with therapists are the ones that I just love. Teachers using D&D in the classroom, and D&D with kids, D&D in schools, D&D in therapy. That's my sweet spot. So I find it absolutely fascinating that this game can do so many of those things for people. It's a game. It's fantasy. It's make-believe. Yeah. But in learning about how people have been using it in therapy, I think it's just fascinating. But here you are taking on the role of this character. It's like you, but not you, like a heroic version of you, but still elements of you. And it's like just enough removed that you can feel safe in exploring something that you wouldn't feel safe doing in real life. Like, I like to play characters that are a little bit chaotic. Yeah. I don't do that in real life. I am very buttoned up and maybe even a little bit of a control freak. I'm not messing around. But I love to just get out there in the D&D world and just like, I don't know where this spell is going to go. I'm going to try that. Or I'm just going to say something hugely inappropriate to this guard and just see the consequences because it'll be a fun story. Things like that. Like just helping. It's just easier to take risks when it's removed from, it's not you, it's your character. But also there is that whole concept of bleed where the things that happen in game do also affect you as in real life. Yeah. So I think positive or negative, but you can take some of that positivity that you've experienced as your character and you can bring that into your real life. Like somebody who's struggling with social skills or social anxiety can talk to a guard because it's not them. And it's their character, and their character is really good at this. And they start doing that enough where they realize, oh, like I can do this. I'm doing it. I'm actually doing it in this game. And now I can try to do that in real life. But I know one of the essays that Greg wrote about Rufus Hound, I mean, that's definitely one of the more profound, hugely impactful ways that D&D has affected someone, and that really moved both of us as well, hearing that story.
Yeah, totally. As well as Dr. Mike Mallon, who's known as the IDDM. His story is he lost his brother to suicide, and he wanted to come on to talk through the stigma, really the social stigma around it. And I remember that day, Shelly and I were like, I don't know if we could do this interview. We're so much about like, this is a game. We're rolling dice. We try to keep it light. We make fun of things. How are we going to talk about this? And it was also in the middle of a blizzard in the Seattle
my living
area.
room. And we were at my house.
And we went. We were so dedicated to recording. We went to Shelly's house. We asked Chris Perkins to come over.
He walked in the snow. And I didn't know that Shelly had cats and was extremely allergic to cats. My cat tried to kill him.
Oh no!
So all these things were going on, and at the same time, Dr. Mallon was just talking about the pain and awful story of what happened to his brother and the connection that they had with Dungeons and Dragons, and how he turned it into something that he wanted to make positive, which was that it's important to talk through these things. If you see people hurting, reach out and do these simple tactics, get together with them on a weekly basis to play D&D. Like all of these things were really important. And so I love that essay that we talk about that in the book, as well as one we haven't mentioned a bunch, but it's one that you wrote, Shelly, about the data around mental health in Dungeons and Dragons from
Hawk Robinson.
Yeah, Hawk Robinson and John Welker, right? Yep. Who have made it their mission to basically prove everything that we hold as tenets of the Dragon Talk podcast, which is that D&D is good for you for all of these reasons, and they can empirically show it through data, as well as the cataloging of papers, of writing actual theses and giving some basis for the things that we kind of know inherently as D&D players. And I love that too, because it shows that there are people who are committed to this idea that gaming is healthy and offers so much good in the world.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely been mental health therapists and counselors that I've had on my show who run their own D&D games for, kids who have all sorts of different kinds of disorders. And it's really incredible to see the way that it gives you the opportunity to practice life in a way that is safe, and you have support and a community around you. And I think it is so beautiful. Like when I started playing D&D, I didn't think of any of that kind of stuff. And yet I ended up having this pretty successful career where I'm, very customer facing and forward and communicating with all sorts of different people. And I know a lot of why I'm decent at communicating with people came with because of the fact that I'd get around a table and practice having conversations in all sorts of different scenarios for 25 years. I was doing that, and I think it bled over into my real life so much, and just made the comfort of speaking something that I think anybody who plays the game can get better at so many different things in their real life, just by having fun and spending time with their friends, laughing and practicing skills that they might not have.
So can we ask you, because you have a lot of experience in this field, what do you think it is about this game? Because role-playing is not new as a tactic in therapy. Is it because it's wrapped in a game that people let down their guard and it doesn't feel like therapy?
Yeah, I think that has a lot to do with it. I think you're absolutely right on that front, is that what it looks like from the participant is that they're just having a good time. They don't see all of the things it's just like that old adage is, if you find something you love doing, you'll never work a day in your life. It's very similar. It's tied to that whole thing. Like, you're getting together, you're doing all the things that we need for building quality friendships, like spending time with people on a regular basis, supporting them, goals that you are accomplishing together, like team-oriented tasks. All of these things that really are part of us being social creatures are wrapped up there in the game. and the whole part of exercising our creative imagination, which is something that a lot of people who aren't involved in role-playing games or games of any kind, they forget what it's like to play and to have fun and to do creative problem solving. But you're doing all of this under the guise of a game. So you're not thinking about it as, well, I'm practicing all these life skills, but really you are. And all those things that you can do to like beat depression or anxiety or all these other sort of non-normative disorders that somebody might have, you have the opportunity to learn how to act in a communal space with people who aren't going to be upset with you if you don't say the right thing. You're not being judged in the same way you might be in a normal setting. So it gives you the opportunity to just try all those things and experience all those things with people who are there supporting you as part of your team of heroes.
Love that. That's a great answer.
Amazing. Yes.
So anyways, that's...
Did you write that down, Greg?
Put me on the spot, but hey, that's fun.
We're committing it to memory.
So let me ask each of you, when you get around the table as a player, what's your favorite kind of character to play?
Well, I've kind of alluded to this. I love magic users. I have tried to break free. I have tried to go out of my comfort zone. And then I thought, why? I'm enjoying this. This is fun. And I always miss being a magic user when I'm not one. So I love sorcerers.
Mm-hmm.
They are probably my favorite. Although I am getting really into warlocks. And again, I do think I enjoy the warlock because they're a little bit sus.
To use the parlance of our times.
Yes. So like to speak like my child, I do feel like I kind of just like that shady background. And it's not like me in real life. But I love wild magic. I just love a little bit of chaos, and it just feels very free for me to just be able to get out there and just cause a little trouble, because I just don't get to do that in real life.
And that might be why you're so drawn to it anyways, is it gives you the opportunity to have those experiences that aren't part of your normal repertoire.
I have two. I have a lot of ties to the half-elf ranger. Definitely fantasy fulfillment there from when I fell in love with Aragorn and Strider back in the day, to also Tanis, half-elven in the Dragonlance. That was the first character I ended up playing in a long-form campaign in New York. And so that's the one I kind of always fall back onto. I get that character, the kind of somewhat quiet loner who is happy to shoot bows from the back, but also has a mysterious everyman type of quality to them. But I also really love bards as well. They speak to me on a performance level. I love the idea of kind of melding a lot of the skills that I've developed through being on Dragon Talk as long as we have, as well as in my previous career as like a stand-up comedian and doing films and movies and stuff, that I just love the idea of there being an adventurer who's actually in show business at the same time. That seems funny to me, and I love it, and I want more characters like that. Not so much the erudite poet bard, but the one who is trying to just make ends meet, but also can cast spells sometimes and be an adventurer, but in a more scoundrel, reluctant way.
Yeah, I like bards a lot too. Rangers, when it comes to magic users, I tend to gravitate more towards the wizards than the sorcerers. I'm not sure why. I'm sure there's a psychological reason for the difference between people who gravitate towards sorcerers and those who gravitate towards prepared casters, but I haven't studied that.
I have a theory there. I think it has to do with collecting.
Oh yeah,
because
definitely.
At least in my brain, sorcerers are really great. They can do a lot of damage with a select number of skills that they're really powerful at. Spells that they can really do really well. But it's something about the wizard collecting spells through finding spell books and adding them to their spell books, and even if they don't use them, because it's really hard as a prepared wizard to be like, well, I'm going to prepare grease, and it'll be used in the perfect way to great effect, or those more utility spells. Sometimes it's hard to really pull that off, but for me, I just like having the option to use them in the future, even though I probably play wizards a lot more like sorcerers, where I'm like, oh, I just have fireball prepared every day and I just use it every day. But I like that aspect of wanting to increase my power by going to libraries and studying and adding them into my spellbook.
There probably is something to that, because I think when I do play a wizard, all of my extra gold goes to buying every scroll I can to add it to my spell. It's like,
you got to
you're right.
them all.
It is about clicking. All right, I've got one more fun question before a serious question. So the fun question I want to ask you is, because our group has this ongoing debate about stat generation methods. And so I'm going to rope you both into our debate and ask you, when it comes to creating characters, what is your favorite stat generation method? Is it a point buy system? Is it a stat array, or is it a roll of the dice?
I'll take this one first, Shelly. You can chime in. I'm going to maybe throw a wrench in your plans here and say, I just like doing whatever the DM prefers. I think that character creation is like the style of game that you're going to play. Like if you are going to do a more tactical dungeon crawler type of game, there is something to be said about like, whoa, let's just do 3 dice 6 for each stat in order and pick what you got. Like just deal with it, because that's part of the fun, is like, like a roguelite video game where you're just trying to figure out like, oh, can I survive through this with the randomness of this stat generation? But if you got a DM who's more story based, who's more role play based, I don't think it really matters. I think you can have one that's more, that some player in that first category might think is OP. And it doesn't matter to me, because it's just going to serve the style of game that's going to be out there. And so, sorry, I won't let you settle that debate, but I think it's a very good
diplomatic answer. I like.
I think I usually go with the standard array. Yeah. And then I send it to Chris Lindsay and I go, did I do this right? Is this character look okay to you? And he'll be like, oh, let me just fix it for you.
You guys, I might have to edit this out.
No.
Neither of you are on
What's
my
your
side.
What do you think?
What's
yours?
I'm just
you like the dice.
So I am a dice purist when it comes to that. And I sometimes really old school, doing like stats in order, but sometimes, place them as you see fit. We also have some really weird house die rolling methods, which a lot of people think are just crazy, but they're fun. Like our big one is we do 3d6 reroll ones twice, 4d6 reroll ones twice, and 5d6 reroll ones twice. And so you can end up with an array that's from like 6 to 24, which is kind of crazy, but it lets you play with some pretty serious strengths and weaknesses, which I like for story purposes. I really like having the, you're really good at one thing, but like terrible at another thing. I think that to me feels a little more real.
Yeah,
sometimes.
I do. I like the dice rolling, because it feels more like your DNA. Like it's just who you are.
Yeah, I think for me, that's the big draw to it, is it kind of has the feeling of like, luck of birth, luck of the way you were raised, and it kind of gives a randomness that you don't find in the other methods, which, to be fair, is what part of my other group isn't fond of. They want everybody to have equitable stats and kind of have the same opportunity, which I understand the argument.
Well, if I'm going to go random, I'm going to go full random and just click random, create random character on D&D Beyond and play with what you get.
There you go.
That's so fun.
One of our most successful campaigns, everything was random. We randomized our gender, we randomized our race, we randomized our class. All stats were random in order. And it ended up being an incredibly successful campaign, because none of us went into it with expectations, which I think made it a very different play style than we were used to.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so more serious question now. There's been a lot of big changes, progressive changes in the role-playing community in the last few years. Can you speak to what you think are the most important ones that have happened? And is there anything either of you think that still needs work?
Well, we talk about this in the book in Welcome to Dragon Talk. One of the essays is about the interview that I had with Tanya DePass, who is one of the members of Rivals of Waterdeep, a big stalwart in the TRPG community now. But she wasn't back then when we spoke to her in 2016. I had found her through my love of video games, and she was talking about Dragon Age a lot. And so I was following her for that. And then she just happened to be live tweeting a talk that Jeremy Crawford was giving at a smaller convention here in the Pacific Northwest area. And I was like, oh my gosh, I had no idea she played D&D. Let's invite her on. and we'll talk about her experiences. They weren't always awesome with Dungeons and Dragons. She was very open about like, hey, I'm coming back into it now. I appreciated everything Jeremy was saying. She loved that. And this was back in like 2016. So the 2014 Player's Handbook, she said that she was really gratified that the default illustration of the human fighter was of a Black woman with locks. And that was really important for her, and hadn't felt that type of representation in the game before. She also was very upfront about how the experiences she's had around the table weren't awesome due to essentially systemic racism within the D&D community, and how that kind of pushed her out, and she kind of associated the game with those feelings instead of the positive feelings that we were talking about earlier that other people were going for. And so that interview was a really a changing point for me, because we had that really frank discussion. I was aware of some of those things, but I hadn't had it expressed to me in quite such a powerful way, especially in the middle of a podcast as we're talking about D&D. And it really just occurred to me that I can't change systemic racism, but I can do small things, maybe just do a little bit, and invite more people of color onto Dragon Talk, invite more people of color to be a part of the marketing initiatives that Dungeons and Dragons was doing, to continue with a lot of the great work that the art directors and the game designers for D&D 5th edition had already done in showcasing people of color and people from different genders and sexual orientations in the books themselves, and show that in all aspects of the game's promotion, including, like I said, the marketing. So when I had the opportunity to invite folks to play live on stage in 2018 for the Stream of Many Eyes, I contacted Tanya. I was like, we should get a group together of people, all people of color, who are playing together. Some of them can be playing for the first time. It doesn't matter. And, she had some friends that she knew, and I had some people that I knew in the Chicago area. And within a few months, we put them up on stage playing Dungeons and Dragons together, really for the first time on stage in front of folks. They had a few session zero type of conversations, but had never kind of coalesced as a group actually playing until they were on stage together. And that was a real success, I thought. Everyone really enjoyed playing together. They're still playing to this day and are really excited about finishing that campaign, getting up to level 20 and making that be a part of it. And I think that was just one aspect of how the Dungeons and Dragons community has been more open to people who are not the stereotypical D&D gamer that you might even see in Stranger Things or things like that, right? Like, there is so many more people out there who can get something from this game. They don't even have to be English speaking. They can be all over the world speaking their native language and playing Dungeons and Dragons, because everybody, humans, tell stories together. It is in some ways what makes us human, is the act of sitting around a fire and entertaining each other. And to me, that was true from when history began, and I think it's still true to this day with Dungeons and Dragons. And it only becomes more enriched when there are more people with different backgrounds and different cultural cues and stories. Just like the D&D party itself is better and more equipped when they are diverse and have different aspects and skill sets to bring to the table. And so, to me, that has been the real big change in the Dungeons and Dragons community over the last few years, is this openness to people from all walks of life to get in and just enjoy all of the positive aspects of this game together.
Yeah,
Thanks. Yeah, and there's still more work to do. I mean, that's the other thing. It's not like it's mission accomplished. There is always ways that we can learn and make this game more accessible. For people who have disabilities, for people who are out there for whatever reason aren't able to play as often. And so there's still strides to be done, and we're not going to be perfect in any way. But I think what has shifted from that interview with Tanya and on to a lot of the other folks that we talked about in Welcome to Dragon Talk is that the momentum seems to be going towards as much inclusion as possible, which I'm really gratified. And it's not just happening in the D&D team and members and all that. Like, it's happening in the entire community, which is really, really great to see.
Yep. +1 on all that.
Yeah, definitely.
Good job, Greg.
You mentioned this was like an eye-opening moment for you. And I kind of went through the same thing when I first started my podcast. A couple of my early episodes, I had said things like, oh, it's okay for races to be evil. It's just a game. And I was looking at it from a very, very different perspective. I was already represented in the game of D&D. It was written for people like me, by people like me, back when it was first created. And so I had listeners reach out to me and say, hey, maybe you should look a little bit further into this and take another look at that point of view. And so I spent 3 or 4 weeks researching the topic and really talking to a lot of people in the community about how they were represented in the game. And it very much changed my perspective on how I wanted to represent myself and represent my table, the monsters in my games and things like that. So I think it is really important that the conversation just keeps happening, because people, even like myself, who are well-intentioned and there's still so much to learn about, when you're not part of a minority, about what it means for a person who is part of a minority to look at something that you don't see a problem with and then see how it looks different.
Yeah. And I think that's an important point. I mean, it's something I basically stayed out in that essay. It was like, I just didn't know. I was ignorant of these things. And the skills that I learned through Dungeons and Dragons, which is listening. As a dungeon master, you have to hear when people are talking, so you can make the game more fun and more interesting. And to me, you did that exact same thing, which was just hearing what people were saying, hearing their point of view and their perspective. And again, I just want to point out how Dungeons and Dragons gave you the tools necessary to come through that situation and be like, oh, I've learned, I've changed, right? And there are folks who I see online or whatever, like who would be, confronted with that mild criticism and just be like, no, screw that. Right. And so I'm so glad that you took that opportunity to be like, all right, yeah, there is some listening that I can do.
Yeah. And I think that goes true for everyone, no matter how progressive they may be. There's still things that they don't understand about another person's point of view, and listening to each other and learning from each other is a beautiful aspect about D&D, because it does bring so many different cultural perspectives to the table, especially when you are playing with people who are not from your own background. It's in the DNA of the
game itself that you want to work with elves and humans and barbarians and sorcerers, I guess sorceresses, I guess too.
Oh, really? You're going to let sorceresses play too? Guess.
All right, well, let's move on, cyclothids, to our tricks of the trade. So for today's tricks of the trade, I would just ask Greg and Shelly to share one piece of advice that they can give, something that they've learned in the writing of this book, for players or DMs out there going forward that they can use in their games or at their gaming table in the future.
What do you think, Shelly?
I would say, very simply, invite someone to your table. Invite someone new, someone who doesn't see themselves as a D&D fan or doesn't think they're a D&D fan. Maybe somebody who watches reality TV and hasn't seen all the Lord of the Rings movies or something. Just bring that person to the table and invite them to play, and just see what happens. I do think that there is something in this game for everyone. I really do. And so the more people that we get playing it, the better off we're all going to be. Because like Greg said, D&D does make you a better person. So bring it to someone who needs it, especially if you see somebody out there struggling, or somebody that you think, I feel like you could be a good asset to this D&D party, or you need a D&D party in your life. Bring it to them.
I love that.
That's super cool. Wonderful. I thought you were going to tell people how to pronounce the word especially.
Did you hear me say it twice? Again, Rob, I learned from recording the audiobook version. I said, I pronounce especially incorrectly. I say especially. So I'm working on that.
I probably do that myself. I'm thinking about it because either way you say it kind of sounds right, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I've
it sounds
especially incorrect.
Accurate,
and I write it a lot, and I say it a lot, as it turns out. So,
for me, I think the thing I've learned through talking to different people on the podcast, as well as in the writing of this book, is, God, there's so many different lessons. Some of them are Dungeon Master related. Some of them are just creation related. But I think the thing I want to say here is, getting back to what we were talking about earlier, it's just do it. Yeah. Make the thing that you want to make, schedule the D&D game that you want to schedule, get out there, and don't let your imposter syndrome or that little voice inside you that say you're not good enough to hold you back, because everybody we've talked to, from the most successful creative person down to someone just starting out, has said they have some form of, I don't deserve to be here. I don't need, what are you even talking to me for? Which we mentioned in the book. Matt Mercer, when he came to one of our events, was one of the first times we brought folks who were streaming Dungeons and Dragons for the first time in 2017. And we were all in a studio here in Seattle. And it was folks from like Acquisitions Incorporated. Chris Perkins was there. Folks who had been streaming through Geek and Sundry. Folks who had been doing it across the pond and in the UK. People in Australia who had an improv group who were all together and had not been in the same physical location. And were meeting some of these people for the first time. First people they'd only known on social media or through their work in video ways. And each one of them was like, I don't think I should be here. Why did I get invited? And then Matt Mercer was like, I don't think I've been in a place where every single person has imposter syndrome. Every single person here, including himself. He was feeling it at that moment too. That just goes to show that like we all want to think that we're crap in some weird way, right? Like that we don't have enough. We don't have what it takes. You know, our talent or our determination or our gumption isn't enough. But I think you just kind of have to kind of push through that as much as you can. And it's something you learn at a certain point in your life as a creative person. Either you do it young and you have that going with you the whole time, or you do it when you're in your 50s and writing a book about Dungeons and Dragons with your friend who you also happen to have a podcast with, right? And you're just like, you know, all right, yeah, we can do this. We can make a book about a podcast and get people excited about what we do each week. So yeah, I just think make the thing, do it.
Awesome. Okay, so before we sign off, let the listeners know, where can they pre-order the book? Where can they get in contact with you? Or where can they listen to the show? Anything else you want to plug?
You can find me online at Shelly Moo on Twitter or Instagram, or my website at shellymazzanoble.com. You can find Dragon Talk wherever you find your podcasts. It should be there. And you can find our book at University of Iowa Press. You can pre-order it there because I heard you might get it early. In fact, I know people who've gotten it early. So even though the release date is December 5th, if you just can't wait, try there, or go to bookshop.org and plug in your local indie or your online retailer of your choice. It's everywhere.
Yeah. Awesome. And +1 to there being an audiobook out there. So if you don't always like to have a physical book and thumb through the pages and read it yourself, you can have the dulcet tones of me and Shelly read it to you. And you'll be able to get that on Amazon, Audible, Spotify, audiobooks.com, iTunes, Google Play, Kobo, Overdrive. Those are some things I don't even know what those are, but they are going to have our book, which is amazing. And we're still recording some parts of that. So that will be exciting. It might be a little bit after December 5th, but we'll let everybody know on our social media handles. So I'm at Greg Tito on Twitter, Greg_Tito on Instagram. I signed up for a co-host account that's at Greg Tito as well. I don't post anything on there quite yet. I keep saying that just in case Twitter blows up and nobody's able to post on there ever again. I also have a Star Trek rewatch podcast called Re-Engage. You can follow that along on Re-Engage TNG on Twitter, or download that on wherever you get podcasts. And I am working on a short film. We're going to be finishing up that pretty soon and submitting that into festivals. It's called Ex-Husband. You can follow that at Ex-Husband Film on Instagram and Twitter as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for coming on the show today. I have imposter syndrome just from having you here. So that plays in very well to what we've been talking about, but I really appreciate your time and
we appreciate your time and hosting us. This has been really, really great and wonderful.
Thanks so much, Robert. This is fantastic. You did it. You're doing the thing. You're making it. So
I'm making it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
How cool was that? Greg Tito and Shelly Mazzanoble on this show chatting with us about their book. What a fantastic interview and so much fun. It was great having them here. I do want to remind you that we are on break between seasons. Season 2 will be returning at the beginning of the year. In the meantime, you can always get a hold of me through email, dungeonsdragonpsychology@gmail.com. You can also follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Instagram is where I'm the most active, and it's at Dungeons_Dragons_psychology. So please check me out there, and I will have probably 1 or 2 more bonus episodes coming before Season 2 releases with some big guest announcements who are going to be coming on Season 2. In the meantime, we'll see you all next session.